At 12:40 in the afternoon, people in Boston's North End heard a sound like machine gun fire. Seconds later, a steel wall taller than a three-story building tore apart. What came through it was not water, oil, or fire. It was more than 2 million gallons of molasses. The dark wave moved through the neighborhood with enough force to lift buildings from their foundations, twist elevated railway supports, and carry horses, carts, and people down the street. By the time it stopped, 21 people were dead and roughly 150 were injured. But the strangest part of the Great Molasses Flood was not the substance itself. It was how many warnings appeared before the disaster, and how carefully they were ignored. In 1915, the Purity Distilling Company needed somewhere to store an enormous supply of molasses near Boston Harbor. Molasses was an industrial ingredient as well as a sweetener. It could be fermented to produce alcohol, and wartime demand made speed valuable. The company chose a crowded waterfront section of the North End. Homes, workshops, stables, and an elevated railway stood close by. A cylindrical steel tank rose beside Commercial Street. It was approximately 90 feet wide and 50 feet tall, large enough to dominate the neighborhood. The tank was built quickly. According to later testimony, it was not given the kind of careful, full-scale water test that such a structure demanded. The man overseeing the project was not a trained engineer. Production mattered. The schedule mattered. The tank simply had to be ready. Almost immediately, residents noticed something was wrong. The tank groaned when it was full. Molasses leaked from its seams and ran down the sides. Children reportedly collected the sweet liquid in containers. Instead of treating those leaks as evidence of structural failure, the company painted the tank brown, making the stains harder to see. The neighborhood had been given a warning. It had simply been disguised as an inconvenience. By January 1919, the tank had endured years of repeated filling and emptying. Boston was in the middle of winter, but the weather had changed sharply. Temperatures climbed after a period of bitter cold. Inside the tank, a fresh shipment of warmer molasses mixed with the colder, thicker material already there. The exact mechanics would be debated for decades. Fermentation may have increased internal pressure. Temperature changes may have stressed the steel. Modern engineering analyses have pointed to metal that was too thin, brittle behavior in the cold, and weaknesses around the rivet holes. Whatever combination finally pushed the structure past its limit, the tank had been waiting for failure. On January 15, laborers were eating lunch. Children were outside. Firefighters were resting in a nearby station. The neighborhood was carrying on with an ordinary Wednesday. Then came the sharp cracks. The tank burst open and its roof collapsed inward. A massive wall of molasses surged into the streets. Witnesses described a wave that may initially have reached about 25 feet high. Estimates placed its speed at roughly 35 miles per hour near the tank. At that speed, molasses did not behave like the slow syrup people knew from a kitchen. It struck like moving debris. The force smashed wooden structures and pushed a firehouse partly from its foundation. Sections of the elevated railway were damaged. A train approaching the area was stopped before it entered the worst of the destruction. Wagons overturned. Horses were trapped. People were thrown against walls or buried beneath wreckage. And then the disaster changed. As the wave spread and lost speed, the molasses became a different kind of danger. In the winter air it thickened. Every movement became difficult. Victims could not swim through it. Rescuers could not run across it. Clothing became heavy, boots stuck to the ground, and broken wood and metal disappeared beneath the dark surface. Firefighters, police officers, sailors, Red Cross workers, and residents entered the wreckage. Some used ladders and planks to cross the deepest areas. Others pulled survivors from collapsed structures. The rescue lasted for days, while recovery continued much longer. Molasses coated streets, buildings, tools, clothing, and harbor water. It was carried through Boston on shoes and wagon wheels. Cleanup crews used salt water pumped from the harbor, but the sticky residue resisted almost everything. The company quickly suggested sabotage. The United States had recently emerged from the First World War, and fears of bombings and political violence were real. Blaming an unknown attacker offered a convenient explanation for a catastrophe that looked increasingly preventable. But families of the victims did not accept it. More than 100 claims were combined into a major civil proceeding. The hearings lasted for years and produced thousands of pages of testimony. Engineers, workers, residents, and specialists described the construction, the leaks, the sounds, the pressure, and the failures that came before the flood. The eventual finding rejected the sabotage theory. The company was held responsible and paid damages. The ruling became an important moment in the history of American industrial accountability. Large structures could no longer be treated as private experiments whose risks ended at a company's fence. The disaster also helped strengthen expectations that major engineering projects required professional oversight, reliable calculations, testing, inspection, and responsibility to the public. For decades, the story was often repeated as a strange historical curiosity, the day Boston was flooded by something sweet. But that description hides the real lesson. This was not a freak accident created by an impossible substance. It was a chain of ordinary decisions. Build quickly. Skip a test. Ignore a leak. Conceal a warning. Assume that because a structure survived yesterday, it will survive tomorrow. The tank did not fail without warning. It groaned. It leaked. It changed shape under pressure. The people living beside it could see that something was wrong, even when the company claimed otherwise. Today, a small plaque in Boston's North End marks the location. The neighborhood has changed, and the enormous tank is long gone. Yet the Great Molasses flood still feels modern because its central question has never disappeared. How many disasters begin with a warning that everyone can see, but no one with authority is willing to act on?